The night stretched endlessly, quiet and empty, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating stretches of road flanked by trees that seemed to lean closer with every passing second. Somewhere, beyond what the eye could see, a shadow waited, patient and calculating, watching every movement, predicting every choice. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying a faint sense of warning, a feeling that something ordinary could become terrifying in an instant. One car, one driver, one moment of trust and a life could vanish without a sound, without a struggle, leaving only questions that refused to be answered. The highway seemed infinite, yet confined, a corridor where fear moved silently, and the familiar became unfamiliar in the blink of an eye. And in that quiet, the darkness held its secret, reminding anyone who dared to listen that the night began like any other, and that was what made it dangerous. A quiet American highway stretched forward under a pale sky, and the road seemed endless and empty. Headlights cut through darkness, and trees stood still like silent witnesses. Somewhere along this road, a moment passed unnoticed, and a life shifted into mystery. No alarms sounded, no screams echoed. No one realized that a normal evening was about to become an unsolved question that would linger for decades. By morning, there would be an absence that could not be explained. By nightfall, there would be fear without a face. And years later, there would still be only fragments and shadows. This is where the story begins, not with violence, but with routine and trust, and the belief that tomorrow would arrive as it always had. Evan Miller lived a structured life built on quiet habits and predictable days. He was in his mid-30s and worked as a systems technician for a regional logistics company. His job required attention to detail and long hours staring at screens in a low-lit office. Coworkers described him as reliable and distant in a gentle way. He was not secretive, but he was private. He lived alone in a modest rental house on the edge of a growing suburb where new developments met older woods. Each morning, he left before sunrise, and each evening, he returned just after dark. His neighbors recognized his car and the soft glow of his porch light that clicked on at the same time every night. Evan had a small circle of family that included his younger sister Rachel, who lived 2 hours away, and their mother, who spoke to him every Sunday evening. These calls followed a pattern that never changed. They talked about work, about weather, about small plans for the future. Evan listened more than he spoke. He had once been engaged years earlier, but that chapter had closed quietly. Since then, his life had settled into something calm and uneventful. There was comfort in that calm, and he seemed to prefer it. On the evening before he vanished, Evan followed his routine with precision. Security cameras at his workplace showed him leaving the parking lot just after 9. The building lights shut down behind him, and his car merged onto the highway. Traffic was light, and the road ahead appeared clear. Radio towers blinked in the distance, and forests pressed close to the asphalt. There was nothing unusual in his movements, and nothing that suggested danger. He sent a brief text to his sister, saying he would call on the weekend. That message would later be read again and again, searching for hidden meaning. At home, his house remained untouched. The bed was made. The kitchen was clean. No signs of struggle existed anywhere in the space. His phone charger was plugged in beside the couch. A half-read book sat open on the table. Everything suggested that Evan expected to return, yet he never did. His car was never seen pulling into the driveway. The porch light remained dark that night. The following morning, Evan failed to appear at work. This was the first sign that something was wrong. He had never missed a shift without notice. Calls to his phone went unanswered. By afternoon, his supervisor contacted local police and requested a welfare check. Officers arrived at the house just before sunset. They found the doors locked and the interior exactly as it had been left. There was no evidence of forced entry and no indication that Evan had packed or prepared to leave. His car was also missing. It was a dark sedan with no distinctive markings and no tracking system installed. Cameras along the highway captured fragments of its movement, but nothing definitive. Somewhere between his office and his home, the trail faded. Investigators initially assumed a simple explanation. A breakdown, an accident, a voluntary disappearance. But none of these theories held weight for long. Search teams combed nearby forests and drainage areas. Helicopters scanned tree lines and empty fields. Empty highways echoed with sirens and flashing lights. As patrols widened the search radius, days passed without discovery. No vehicle, no body, no trace. Each hour without answers deepened the unease. Rachel arrived within 2 days and stood in her brother's silent home, feeling the weight of his absence. She noticed details others might overlook: his shoes still by the door, his jacket hanging untouched. He had left with only what he was wearing. That knowledge haunted her. Evan was not impulsive. He did not disappear without reason. As the investigation continued, small details began to surface that complicated the picture. A gas station clerk reported seeing a man resembling Evan late that night, but could not be certain. A driver claimed a similar car was stopped on the shoulder, miles from the expected route. These fragments did not align. They pointed in different directions and led nowhere solid. Each tip raised hope and then dissolved. At night, investigators drove the same highway, retracing his final known route. The road felt different in darkness. Long stretches passed without lights or buildings. Forests closed in on both sides, and the sense of isolation grew heavier. It was easy to imagine how someone could vanish here without leaving a mark. Easy to imagine how a single decision or encounter could change everything. Weeks later, the case remained open and unanswered. Evan Miller was officially listed as missing, under unexplained circumstances. His family lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn and unable to hope fully. The house stayed exactly as it was, waiting for a return that never came. But unknown to them, a single overlooked detail from that night was about to resurface. A detail hidden in plain sight that would challenge every assumption and suggest that Evan Miller did not simply disappear. Something else had happened on that empty highway, and the truth was far more unsettling than anyone was prepared to face. The first official lead arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, buried inside routine procedure. It came from a traffic camera positioned miles away from Evan Miller's normal route. Late-night footage showed a dark sedan slowing near an exit that did not lead toward his home. The image was grainy, the license plate unreadable, but the timing aligned too closely to ignore. Investigators felt a subtle shift. This was no longer a simple missing person case drifting toward silence. Something had diverted Evan that night, intentionally or by force, and whatever caused it happened fast. Police began reconstructing Evan's final hours, minute by minute. Phone records confirmed his last text to Rachel was sent while his car was still moving. The message carried no urgency, no coded meaning, just a promise to call. There were no additional calls, no unanswered incoming numbers, no signs of panic. His phone stopped transmitting location data shortly after the traffic camera sighting. It did not die gradually. It went silent all at once. Detectives expanded the search area toward the unexpected exit. The landscape changed quickly. Wide highways narrowed into older roads lined with dense trees and long stretches without lighting. Abandoned service buildings appeared behind chain-link fences. A closed rest stop sat dark and vandalized, its parking lot littered with debris. These were places people passed without noticing, places where time seemed to slow and sound disappeared. Ground searches intensified. Officers walked tree lines and checked culverts. Volunteers moved carefully through brush and uneven ground. Dogs tracked faint scents that dissolved near the roadway. No tire marks stood out. No broken branches suggested a crash. The absence itself became suspicious. It felt deliberate, as if whatever happened had been planned or at least carefully hidden. Investigators interviewed coworkers again, this time digging deeper. A supervisor mentioned Evan had seemed distracted in the weeks before his disappearance. Not distressed, just quieter than usual. Another coworker recalled Evan asking about shift changes late at night, something he rarely did. None of it pointed clearly to danger, but it hinted that Evan's routine might not have been as untouched as it appeared. Rachel was questioned gently but thoroughly. She spoke about her brother's habits, his dislike for confrontation, his preference for predictability. She insisted he would never vanish willingly. He did not gamble. He did not abuse substances. He did not keep secrets. Her certainty did not waver, and investigators believed her. Voluntary disappearance began to fall lower on their list. Then came the vehicle report. A truck driver contacted police, claiming he saw a dark sedan pulled over on a remote stretch of road around the same time Evan would have passed through. He remembered it because there were no emergency lights and no other cars nearby. The sedan's hazard lights blinked slowly. The driver did not stop. He assumed help was already on the way. That assumption would haunt him later. Police searched that stretch repeatedly. They found nothing. No debris, no oil stains, no skid marks. The road looked untouched, as though nothing had ever happened there at all. Yet the witness account matched too many details to dismiss. As days turned into weeks, pressure grew. Media coverage increased, bringing attention but also speculation. Some suggested Evan had been targeted. Others implied he might have been hiding something. Rumors spread online, each more dramatic than the last. None were supported by evidence, but all added weight to the investigation. Detectives revisited the gas station sighting. The clerk described a man matching Evan's build standing near the pumps late at night. He appeared to be waiting, not fueling. A dark vehicle was parked nearby, engine running. The clerk noticed the man because he kept looking toward the road, tense and alert. Surveillance footage existed, but the angle was poor. The face was unclear. The timestamp was slightly off. Still, it was another piece pointing toward an interaction Evan did not plan. Rachel watched the investigation from a distance, her life suspended between hope and dread. Each phone call from police tightened her chest. Each day without answers felt heavier than the last. She began driving the routes herself, sitting in her car at night, trying to understand what her brother might have felt. The darkness felt thicker there. The silence pressed in. Internally, investigators debated theories. A random crime seemed unlikely without evidence of violence. A staged disappearance conflicted with Evan's personality. An accident left no physical trace. One possibility lingered quietly in the background. An encounter. Someone Evan knew. Someone who recognized him. Someone who caused him to pull over willingly. That theory gained weight when financial records were reviewed. There was no unusual activity, no withdrawals, no purchases that suggested preparation or escape. His accounts remained untouched after the night he vanished. If Evan had left on his own, he left without resources. Late one evening, a detective reviewing archived highway footage noticed something overlooked before. Several minutes after the suspected sighting of Evan's car, another vehicle passed the same camera. It slowed briefly, then accelerated. The vehicle model was common. The color indistinct, but its timing was troublingly precise. The investigation shifted again. What began as a disappearance now carried the shape of an interrupted journey. A routine broken by a moment no one saw clearly. Somewhere between his office and his front door, Evan Miller had crossed paths with something or someone that altered his fate. The pattern began to form slowly, like an image emerging through fog. Detectives laid photographs across a long table, each one representing a moment from Evan Miller's final known movements. Highway frames, gas station stills, witness sketches drawn from memory. Individually, they meant little. Together, they suggested something intentional. Evan did not wander into uncertainty. He was guided there. Investigators returned to the traffic camera footage and expanded the time window. When they did, another detail surfaced. Several vehicles appeared repeatedly along the same corridor that night, looping through exits and re-entering the highway. Most were common models, easy to ignore, but one stood out because of its consistency. It followed a loose pattern, never close enough to be obvious, yet present at critical points. It was the same vehicle the detective had noticed earlier, now appearing again and again. Witnesses were re-interviewed with fresh focus. A woman who lived near the unexpected exit recalled hearing voices outside her house close to midnight. She assumed it was an argument between travelers pulled over. She did not look outside. Another resident remembered headlights sweeping across his yard, then stopping, then disappearing without engine noise. At the time, it felt insignificant. Now it felt wrong. Police began mapping similar disappearances across nearby counties. Not full vanishings, but reports of drivers feeling followed. Cars being signaled to pull over by strangers claiming there was a problem. In most cases, nothing happened beyond fear, but the similarities were unsettling. Same type of road, same late hours, same sense of urgency used to stop the driver. Rachel was informed carefully. The idea that her brother may have trusted the wrong person cut deeply. She replayed their last conversations in her mind. There had been no fear in his voice, no warning. That meant whatever happened unfolded quickly, before Evan had time to question it. Detectives examined Evan's past more closely. Phone records from months earlier showed a few unfamiliar numbers, brief calls that never repeated. None were saved contacts. When traced, most lead nowhere. Prepaid phones, disconnected lines. One number, however, appeared twice, weeks apart, both times late at night. The calls were short, less than a minute. No voicemails. The owner of the number could not be identified. A former coworker came forward hesitantly. He said Evan once mentioned being stopped on the road by someone claiming to work roadside assistance. The man pointed out an issue with Evan's car that turned out to be nothing. Evan laughed it off at the time. He did not report it. He did not think it mattered. But now that memory took on a darker tone. Psychologists consulted on the case suggested Evan's personality made him vulnerable. He was cooperative, polite, unlikely to challenge authority or appear rude. If someone approached him calmly and confidently, he would listen. If someone suggested danger, he would want to resolve it quickly and get home. That insight reframed everything. Search efforts shifted again. Instead of looking for evidence of an accident, teams searched for places someone could conceal a vehicle or move a person unseen. Old service roads, abandoned properties, tree-covered clearings far from the main highway. The land seemed to absorb sound and erase tracks. Each location felt heavy with possibility. One search team found tire impressions near an old maintenance road. They were faint and weathered, but different from regular traffic patterns. The marks suggested a vehicle had left the road deliberately, not by force. Nearby, the forest opened into a shallow clearing. Nothing else was found. No personal items, no signs of struggle, just silence. The media began framing the case differently. Less mystery, more menace. Viewers were warned about stopping for strangers. Calls flooded the police department, most unhelpful, some cruel. Rachel withdrew from public appearances. The weight of speculation became unbearable. Internally, investigators focused on the repeating vehicle. Analysts tracked similar reports in other states. Nothing conclusive emerged, but enough to suggest this was not random. Someone knew how to exploit trust. Someone knew where to operate without being seen. Late one night, a detective reviewing old dispatch logs noticed something chilling. On the night Evan disappeared, a call had come in reporting a stalled vehicle near the same exit. Officers responded but found nothing when they arrived. The call was logged and forgotten. The number used to place it was untraceable. The implication was disturbing. If the call was fake, it served one purpose: to draw attention away, to create the illusion of help while something else unfolded nearby. As part 3 of the investigation closed, one truth became unavoidable. Evan Miller did not vanish by chance. He encountered a pattern that others had narrowly escaped. He did not, and whatever took him that night was careful, patient, and still out there, unseen, waiting for the next moment of trust to be given freely. The case was officially reopened after nearly a year of silence, and the decision carried a weight that could be felt in every room of the department. New investigators studied the file without the comfort of old conclusions. They read reports slowly, watched footage repeatedly, and listened to recordings that had once been dismissed as background noise. What emerged was not chaos, but intention. The disappearance of Evan Miller no longer appeared accidental. It appeared interrupted. Highway footage was reprocessed using updated enhancement tools. Movements once blurred into darkness now revealed timing and positioning. Evan's car did not drift or hesitate. It slowed deliberately near the unexpected exit. Seconds later, another vehicle entered the frame. It did not follow closely. It lingered. The spacing was careful, practiced, not pursuit, but control. Investigators rebuilt the timeline second by second. Evan left work.com and on schedule. His final message showed no distress. Then something changed. Cellular data revealed his phone stopped transmitting abruptly, not gradually. That detail mattered. Phones usually lose signal in stages. Evan's did not. It was powered off or destroyed, and it happened fast. A deeper analysis of cellular tower connections revealed something that had been missed before. For a brief window, less than 2 minutes, multiple devices connected within a tight geographic radius near the unexpected exit. Evan's phone was one of them. Another device appeared briefly and then vanished from the network permanently. It was never seen again. That silence was not natural. It was deliberate. Search teams were redirected to areas previously overlooked. Not places of chaos, but places of control. Land records were reviewed. Old permits. Forgotten properties. One location stood out. An abandoned rural storage structure hidden behind thick trees and accessible only by a narrow service road. It was close enough to the highway to reach quickly, yet invisible to passing traffic. The land had changed hands years ago and sat unused. When investigators entered the structure, the air felt heavy and stale. Dust coated most surfaces, but not all. The ground showed faint tire impressions. Not fresh, but not old enough to belong to decades past. Footprints overlapped in several spots, suggesting more than one person had been there recently. A small piece of broken plastic trim lay near the entrance. It came from a vehicle interior, but not Evan's. No blood was found, no personal items, no signs of struggle. That absence told its own story. This was not a place where violence erupted. It was a place where something controlled had occurred. Something practiced. Rachel was informed privately. She listened without interruption. When she heard about the structure, her expression shifted. For the first time, fear was replaced with certainty. Evan had not vanished into nothing. He had been taken somewhere. That knowledge was terrifying, but it was also grounding. Mystery was becoming shape. Investigators reviewed similar cases from surrounding states. Reports surfaced of drivers being stopped late at night by individuals claiming there was a problem with their vehicle. Most encounters ended harmlessly. A brief conversation, an inspection, a polite goodbye. But the pattern was consistent. The approach was calm. The authority implied, not forced. Victims complied because they felt safe. One case stood out. A man reported being flagged down months before Evan disappeared. The description of the vehicle matched the repeating pattern seen in the footage. The driver had worn a reflective vest. He spoke confidently. He suggested a loose component under the car. The man declined help and drove away. Nothing happened. He never thought about it again until now. Investigators re-examined Evan's purchase history. Weeks before his disappearance, he had bought a reflective safety vest from a store he rarely visited. The item had seemed meaningless at the time. Now it raised questions. Had someone suggested it? Had Evan been approached earlier and advised to carry it? Had trust been established long before the night he vanished? Psychological profilers were consulted. They described a method built on patience and familiarity. The person involved did not rush. They created situations where compliance felt reasonable. Evan's personality fit perfectly. He avoided conflict. He respected authority. He would not want to appear rude or uncooperative. If someone calmly suggested danger, he would listen. A retired officer reviewing the reopened case remembered something unsettling. Years earlier, rumors circulated about a man who posed as roadside assistance across multiple counties. No complaints were ever substantiated. No crimes were linked. The stories faded, but the description lingered. Unmarked vehicle. Cleanappearance.com voice. Always at night. As investigators pulled more archived reports, the scope widened. The behavior crossed jurisdictions. Different states. Same approach. No clear escalation. Until Evan. Something had gone wrong that night, or something had changed. Late one evening, analysts noticed another overlooked detail. On the night Evan disappeared, a call came into dispatch reporting a stalled vehicle near the same exit. Officers responded and found nothing. The call was logged and forgotten. The number used was untraceable. It had served its purpose. It pulled attention away. It created the illusion of normal roadside trouble. The implications were chilling. Evan had not been alone. He had been managed, redirected, isolated without force. Whatever happened next occurred beyond cameras, beyond witnesses, beyond chance. As resources increased, investigators felt a shift. This was no longer about locating a missing man. It was about uncovering a system, a pattern that relied on trust and routine. Evan Miller had crossed paths with it, and unlike others, he had not walked away. As Part 4 of the investigation drew to a close, one realization settled heavily among everyone involved. Evan's disappearance was not the beginning of the story. It was the moment the pattern finally broke silence. And whatever had taken him was no longer hidden by accident, but by design, waiting in the dark spaces between exits, where trust was still enough to make someone stop. The investigation intensified as weeks turned into months, and what had once seemed like a quiet disappearance now began to take on a darker psychological weight. Detectives spent long nights reviewing evidence, tracing every minute detail, and trying to understand not only where Evan Miller had gone, but why someone had targeted him with such calculated precision. Each clue, each fragment of surveillance, seemed to pull them deeper into a mind that operated in shadows. The realization settled like a heavy fog. This was no random act. This was manipulation, control, and patience executed flawlessly. Rachel spent her days retracing her brother's routes, driving the roads he had taken, standing at the same exits and pull-offs, trying to imagine the scenario that had unfolded. She imagined the headlights of his car reflecting in the rearview mirror of another vehicle, the sudden appearance of a calm and authoritative figure suggesting help, and her brother, polite and trusting, complying. The thought made her chest tighten. She could see the sequence in her mind, step by step, as though a slow-motion horror was playing behind her eyes. Every time she tried to rationalize it, the weight of his absence returned, pressing down like a physical force. Detectives focused on the repeating vehicle scene along Evan's route. It became clear that the person behind it understood human behavior intimately. The stops were not forced. They were subtle, designed to elicit compliance. An observer might have called it luck, coincidence, or chance encounters. But those trained in behavioral patterns recognized method. Someone had studied routines, identified trust, and exploited it. Each witness statement, each minor discrepancy now carried an uncomfortable clarity. Evan had been lured. Psychologists consulted on the case provided insight into how someone like Evan could be manipulated. His consistent patterns, polite demeanor, and lack of suspicion made him a perfect target. The person responsible had not needed threats or violence at first. Subtle direction, calm authority, and controlled timing were enough. And when a mistake occurred, when someone resisted or became suspicious, the orchestrator disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind. The psychological depth of the crime began to take hold not only in the investigation but in the minds of everyone connected to the case. During a nighttime review of old highway footage, a detective noticed an anomaly that had been missed before. Another vehicle appeared near the same exit, its lights dim, staying at a distance that suggested observation rather than direct engagement. Its presence was brief, yet deliberate, and it matched the pattern of prior sightings from months before. Analysts speculated it was someone monitoring, ensuring compliance, maintaining control. The realization was chilling. The process had been repeated, studied, and refined. Evan had been in the wrong place at precisely the wrong time. Forensic teams returned to the abandoned structure identified months earlier. They discovered additional traces suggesting multiple visits, tire impressions layered over one another, footprints that did not match known search personnel, subtle scuffs along the walls that indicated movement of small objects. Nothing was overtly violent, nothing that screamed of struggle. Instead, it told of a person or people meticulous in their approach, leaving only what they intended to leave, erasing anything that could betray them. The absence of evidence became a presence itself. It haunted the scene. Rachel, meanwhile, began receiving subtle pieces of information from acquaintances who had not realized their relevance before. A neighbor mentioned a man who had asked questions about the area months prior, someone always calm and observant. Another recalled seeing a car idling late at night near the highway but had dismissed it as a stranger passing through. Each recollection fit the emerging pattern. It was not random, it was intentional. The network of small observations began connecting into a larger, more sinister map. Investigators began theorizing about motive. The repetition across states suggested more than a personal vendetta. Perhaps it was about power, control, or experimentation on human behavior. The careful timing, calculated interactions, and disappearance without trace pointed to someone who had refined a method over time. The sheer precision unnerved the team. They realized that uncovering the truth might mean understanding a mind that did not think like ordinary criminals, a mind that anticipated every move. Late one night, while reviewing footage near the abandoned structure, officers noticed a shadow moving within the tree line. It was fleeting, gone before anyone could focus. But the impression remained. Someone had been there, watching, perhaps even studying the investigators as they retraced the pattern. The presence was invisible, yet palpable, and it reinforced a growing sense of vulnerability. The pattern was alive, still active. As Part 5 progressed, the investigation became as much psychological as physical. Detectives worked to predict behavior, to anticipate the unseen orchestrator. Analysts created simulations based on prior encounters, mapping likely routes, likely stops, likely methods of interaction. The case was no longer about finding Evan alone. It was about confronting a system of control that had ensnared him and could, in theory, ensnare others. The complexity, subtlety, and depth of what had occurred that night began to weigh heavily on everyone involved. And as the days and nights blurred into endless cycles of observation, simulation, and anticipation, one inescapable truth became horrifyingly clear. Evan Miller had not simply vanished. He had been caught in a psychological trap, executed with patience and precision, designed to manipulate, isolate, and erase him from the world without a single violent act, leaving a trace. And while investigators sought answers, the shadow of that trap lingered, silent, calculated, and still potentially active. The breakthrough did not arrive with sirens or sudden clarity. It came quietly through persistence and exhaustion. A junior analyst working late noticed a subtle but repeating inconsistency in the data that others had overlooked. The untraceable phone used near the exit on the night Evan Miller disappeared had gone silent permanently. But its brief connection left a fingerprint. Not a number, not an owner, a behavior. The way it connected to the network matched a small group of similar ghost devices used in other roadside-related incidents across several states. When those incidents were aligned on a map, a corridor appeared. Not random, not wide. a narrow band of highways where exits were poorly lit and cell coverage dipped unpredictably. Someone had learned where technology weakened and where drivers felt most vulnerable. This was not impulse, it was study. Investigators compared the corridor to employment records that required frequent travel at night. One profile surfaced repeatedly: a former independent vehicle inspector named Thomas Hale. He had worked contract jobs inspecting fleet vehicles and roadside damage for insurance claims. His work had taken him across multiple states for years. He owned several unregistered vehicles purchased through private sales. None stood out individually. Together they formed a pattern. Hale had no criminal record, no history of violence. He was described by former colleagues as calm, professional, and unremarkable. He understood vehicles well enough to sound credible. He understood procedures well enough to mimic authority. Most importantly, he understood people. He knew how to speak without pressure, how to suggest without demanding, how to make compliance feel like a choice. When investigators reviewed older footage with this name in mind, the picture sharpened. A man matching Hale's build appeared in background frames at 2 different gas stations on separate nights, months apart. Always alone, always watching traffic more than fueling. In one clip, he wore a reflective vest identical to the one Evan had purchased weeks before his disappearance. Search warrants followed quietly. Hale was located living alone in a rented property near the edge of the corridor. The house was sparse, clean, no personal photographs, no clutter. Inside a locked storage unit, investigators found items that froze the room: multiple reflective vests, portable hazard lights, disposable phones. None tied directly to Evan, but together they confirmed method. Hale was brought in for questioning. He did not resist. He did not panic. He spoke slowly and clearly. He denied harming anyone. He described himself as someone who helped people who needed it. When asked about Evan Miller, he paused longer than before, just long enough to be noticed. Investigators confronted him with the timeline, the corridor, the phone behavior, the abandoned structure. Hale did not deny being in the area. He admitted to stopping drivers when he believed there was danger. He claimed Evan was alive when he last saw him, that they talked, that Evan followed him voluntarily off the road to check something near his vehicle. According to Hale, Evan became frightened when he realized the situation was not official. A struggle did not occur. Panic did. What Hale said next changed everything. He described Evan running into the darkness, leaving his car behind, disappearing into the trees. Hale claimed he waited and then left, believing Evan would return to the road. There was no evidence to confirm or deny this. No body, no remains. Just his word. Rachel was informed with care. The name gave shape to the nightmare, but not closure. Knowing who was responsible did not answer where Evan was. It only confirmed that her brother had trusted the wrong person and paid for it in fear. Investigators returned to the forested area described by Hale, this time with precision. Ground-penetrating radar was used. New paths were cleared. Deep areas previously inaccessible were searched. Days passed, then weeks, and finally, something emerged. Not a body. A fragment of fabric caught deep beneath undergrowth. It matched the shirt Evan had worn the night he vanished. No further remains were found. The official conclusion stated that Evan likely fled in fear and succumbed to the elements or an unknown accident. Hale was charged with multiple counts of unlawful detention and impersonation related to other victims who came forward after his arrest. But Evan's case remained officially unresolved. Hale never confessed to causing Evan's death. He did not need to. His method had done the damage without direct violence. He created fear and isolation and let nature finish the work. Or so investigators believed. As Part 6 closes, the truth stands incomplete but undeniable. Evan Miller did not disappear by chance. He was drawn into a carefully constructed scenario by someone who understood trust better than law enforcement ever could. And even though a name had finally surfaced, the most important answer remained lost somewhere, beyond the road where Evan last believed help was waiting.